Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Pollock and Thurston. I am John Pollock, joined by Brandon Thurston, joining us just days removed as Buffalo is reeling from a debilitating loss to the New England Patriots. And if I have my very, very amateur NFL scheduling in my head, do you guys not have to turn around and have a game tomorrow?
Tomorrow?
Isn't there a Thursday game for the Bills?
Playing tomorrow?
They might be. Don't quote me on that. Definitely don't quote me on that.
I'm a fan when the Bills are on, and I spend little time outside of that thinking about the Bills, except for while I'm watching their tragic losses happen before my eyes.
Well, we have a great show coming up. We might touch on some of the news before we get on out of here, but we would be remiss not to do a cordial welcome to the ever-expanding Patreon family that is out there, Brandon. Patreon, I'd like to say, not the first to get here in the wrestling front, but it has populated over the years. But boy, what a stamp of approval now joining the Patreon ranks, none other than Mark Calloway himself, the Undertaker, taking to Patreon. A sentence that, anyone could have predicted 15 years ago. Guarantee. The Undertaker. Twitter, Patreon, stand-up shows.
Promoting this? He's competing with us now.
Well, you know what? If he wants to come on for maybe a rewind away, maybe he wants to do the next earnings call with us, he is more than welcome to come on for our next TKO breakdown.
So apparently you knew about this for a while.
This happened over the weekend. This quietly came out, but you apparently have seen his whole pitch video.
I've listened to his pitch video where he's like, "This is my new Patreon. This is for all my biggest fans, all the creatures of the night." And he's real excited about it. And he's real excited for you to sign up.
So is this revenue all independent of WWE? Do they get any kind of? This seems like this is an independent venture.
There's no Undertaker here. It's clear this is a Mark Calloway production. I did not see the Undertaker. I've looked at this for like 2 minutes.
In most weeks, this would just dominate the hour of discussion, and maybe a future chat is to be held about pro wrestlers in the Patreon.
It's going to dominate news headlines on wrestling news sites for many, many, many months to come.
Can't wait. But for the next hour, everyone can sit back because it is time for Hall of Fame season, and we needed to have someone come in. If it comes to pro wrestling media, the Hall of Fame wing, this man would be a first ballot inductee, easily encapsulating 60% of the vote. He is Alan4L, the man behind the ProWres Paradise.
Sorry, John. Just give me a second. I'm just subscribing to Mark Calloway's Patreon here, and then I'll be
which
with
tier?
you. Oh, whatever the best one is. Creatures of the Night, Dark Side.
There's three. Yeah. There's an expensive one.
Get in the casket with Mark. Anything available, I'm jumping all over it. Obviously, one of my favorites of all time. No, I will never subscribe to that man's Patreon. I think I can safely say, but
he's jumping into it at the right time. Like, I cannot wait for this time next year when it's an election cycle and the Undertaker, maybe him and Glenn Jacobs are going to do like election night coverage together. What views could come out of Mark Calloway? Was his thoughts on Joe Biden and Donald Trump? These are all thoughts I'm dying to hear.
I'm sure they'll be well researched, well thought out, nuanced. Even more so than the ones we'll bring here on this Hall of Fame edition of the show.
Yes, we are going to dive deep into the Hall of Fame ballot for 2023. For those that are maybe unfamiliar with the criteria and how the Wrestling Observer newsletter Hall of Fame works, essentially, there are people from all different sectors of the industry, media included, that receive a ballot, and you need to achieve 60% of the votes in your given region to go in. You can be eligible after the age of 35 or 15 years inside of the industry, and it is broken up into different geographical regions. And Alan, how long have you been a voter in the Hall of Fame process?
I think probably since the early 2010s, so maybe like 2012 or 13, somewhere around then. So definitely a decade, maybe a decade and change, we'll say. But it was something that because I followed the Hall of Fame. Like my first year really getting into the Hall of Fame and really knowing about its existence was probably like, I think 2004. I would say I missed the Shawn Michaels wars, message board wars of like 2002, 2003.
Some amazing content opportunities during that time. The debate over Shawn with like social media would have been just
oh my God,
magnificent.
Yeah. My good friend Justin Shapiro is still scarred from those fights. But yeah, like 2004, 05, 06, I remember getting really into it then. And then a couple of years later, when I had been doing the show on the Observer website, Dr. Keith Presents, and writing a bit for the Observer, I was able to get a ballot from Dave. And yeah, it's something I take quite seriously. I put a lot of thought into. I try to stick to the criteria, to the letter of the criteria as much as possible, but there obviously is some wiggle room there. Some people have very broad wiggle room that they like to use that maybe kind of go outside the criteria. Um, but I think for everyone, there's a certain amount of wiggle room there. It's that Dave provides with his criteria not being like super strict, but also a pretty clear guidance. And yeah, I try to stick to that. And I think there's been some really interesting candidates the last couple of years, and some interesting developments with the selection process this year in terms of how many votes we can have per category and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a fun process. Honestly, the biggest thing for me is just learning about, like, every year I try to learn about someone new as part of the Hall of Fame research. So that's something that's a lot of fun, and there's other people and uh, that are writing about it and podcasting about it, and I try to just for like about 3-4 weeks just absorb as much as I can and really get into it, and it's just a fun thing to do annually.
It is a really like fun exercise to go through if you're not like living and dying based on the results of such things. But we will go over the criteria for the Hall of Fame is a combination of drawing power, being a great in-ring performer, or excelling in one's field in pro wrestling, as well as having historical significance in a positive manner. A candidate should either have something to offer in all three categories or be someone so outstanding in one or two of those categories that they deserve inclusion. And longevity should be a prime consideration rather than a hot 2 or 3 year run, unless someone is so significant as a trendsetter or a historical figure in the business or valuable to the industry that they need to be included. However, just longevity without being a long-term main eventer, a top draw, and or a top caliber in-ring performer should be seen as relatively meaningless. So, Brandon, just as we dive in, what are the categories that you regularly vote in? And then I'll ask the same to Alan.
I think this year I'm probably only going to vote in US, Canada, Modern, and Japan. But in the past, I have voted in the historical category, and I have voted last 2 years for Mystico in the Lucha Mexico category.
Backed up last week. I mean, clearly Rosenberg, Texas. They went to the ballot box last week and got they cemented Mystico's inclusion last year. How about yourself, Alan? What are the regions that you regularly vote in?
Well, when I asked for the ballot, 10 years ago, I kind of purported myself as an expert in Japan and obviously sort of modern US and Canada. Back when I was still in my 20s, but now in my late 30s, and I start to notice a few grays in the beard, and I see certain names appearing in the historical bucket that make me feel extremely old. As of last year, I've been voting in the historical as well, and trying to. Last year, I did a lot of research into the historical candidates and read a lot about different people, and felt I could kind of give a meaningful vote towards that category. Mexico is something that there are candidates that pop up most years that I feel quite strongly about. Brandon Sad Mystico is a great example. But this year, I've never voted in Mexico because there's usually more there that I'm not comfortable with than that I am. And this year, that's particularly the case. I'm leaving it to others this year for Mexico. The names that are on there, there's one or two that I would have an opinion on, but for the most part, that region this year, I think it's one that I'll step back from, and I'll be interested to see who goes through. And non-wrestler as well, obviously, is something that I've always voted in. I view non-wrestler because it's such a there's such a large quantity of guys in there. You're never going to be an expert on everyone in that bucket, and it's just a case of Dave taking the seeing who comes through with the amount of people that vote, because I think most people tend to vote in that category. So it's you're gonna separate the wheat from the chaff, I guess, in that one.
And we
Yeah,
do have
I'm
non-wrestlers, by the way. It's clarified what category they're in. So
Yes.
non-wrestlers they belong to one of these, you might call them region categories. And until this year, it was, sort of for you to guess which category they belonged to,
Because Chris Harrington discovered that, didn't he? Like about
yes.
7 or 8 years ago. He was like, wait a minute, Dave's doing something funky here.
Yes, it's one of Mookie's many discoveries. And so if you were not, if you say you were choosing not to vote in the historical category, but you wanted to vote for, let's say, Morris Siegel, and you voted for him in the non-wrestler category, you were then sort of voting against everybody you thought you were just abstaining from. But now it's been made clear, much to my relief.
Yeah, I'm voting in the same categories as Alan. I have voted for Mexico in the past, but it's the same where there might be some that stand out that I feel comfortable voting on, but there's enough that I don't, that I feel it's better to just abstain, as well as rest of the world that I'm just not as well versed on the entire field. So maybe we will get some time for some of the historical candidates, but I want to focus a bit on primarily our discussion will be on the modern performers as well as Japan. And as you look at the ballot, Brandon, who is the candidate this year? Well, actually, let's just quickly rewind to last year. It was a pretty sizable class that was inducted in. You had the tag team of Akira Taue and Toshiaki Kawada after years of Taue knocking at the door.
This makes Kawada the only two-time Hall of Famer in this Hall of Fame, I think.
Yes,
which is just fine with me.
Yes, which instead of 2 rings, he gets 2 observer subscriptions now, sent simultaneously to his address at his ramen shop. Mystico, also both of those sets going in with 76% of the vote. Kota Ibushi, 65% of the votes. Los Villanos with 63, and Rollerball Mark Rocco, as well as inductions of Lou Darrow and Johnny Doyle, who were not voted in, but were historical oversights. So the big additions this year include the beauty pair in Japan, Seth Rollins, John Moxley, and the Young Bucks. So some clear consensus, I'm sure, with all of these additions. But Brandon,
and the Briscoes as well, right, John?
Oh, that's right. The Briscoes were also added as well this year in the modern category.
We have two sets of Briscoes on the ballot.
We have Briscoes versus Briscoes. So they will be all fighting for a spot this year in the Hall of Fame. But who would you say is the lightning rod candidate, Brandon? There may be many, but who do you think is the candidate that's going to get the most debate, the most discussion, that you find to be the most fascinating candidate for a opening discussion?
I guess Young Bucks are going to get the most controversy because they're new. I would say Reigns and Punk are lightning rod candidates too, but they've been on the ballot for a couple of years at least now. But the Young Bucks, this is their first time on the ballot. They have a close association, you could say, with the Observer in many ways. And I think are we asserting opinions already? I think they're pretty strong candidates, especially considering that they're a tag team. Compare them to the tag teams of their era and the importance that they had with helping launch AEW.
Alan, what are some of your opening thoughts regarding the Young Bucks? And also kind of, I think you're going to get a lot of similar comparisons to the Briscoes when it comes to in-ring contribution. But the Young Bucks, I think there's an argument without all of the like AEW involvement of launching it, but I think like it's a pretty strong foundation that they come into this ballot with.
Yeah, it's funny. When you I have to step back from kind of what I've been doing in my head regarding the Hall of Fame to when we come on a show like this and we're discussing kind of like you mentioned them as being like a big talking point candidate right from the start. I'm like, oh my God, I've given zero amount of seconds thought to the Young Bucks for this because to me they're just such a slam dunk. Like I was like, I knew I'd be voting for them whenever they appeared on the ballot, and then I was like, okay, they're on this year, I'll be voting for them. And it's because of what you said, John. They have such a strong case before all the influence. I'll take the influence side of things first, like seeing how their careers developed, because I've been following the Young Bucks since Matt Jackson sent me links on MySpace in 2006 to stuff they were doing in like their backyard, and I saw their PWG debut in 2007, I believe it was, and then saw them go to Dragon Gate in 2008, and I've followed their whole career and have seen the lows they hit when like the industry was not accepting of, like, if you think of like the period when they were in TNA and Impact, and and they were just
They were
not
broke.
getting it.
Like,
They
that
were
was
not.
like a
They were
huge part of their
broke.
story. Yeah.
They were not getting a chance, and they went to New Japan, and they were able to absolutely latch on to something that existed, the groundwork that had been built by Fergal Devitt and Carl Anderson and those guys. They latched onto that for sure, but they and Kenny put their own stamp on it, on the Bullet Club, and I would say certainly raised the stock and the popularity and the appeal on a broad scale of that faction, that branding, whatever you want to talk about. And they did it while never really, I don't think, having a huge decline in their level of performance. And it just obviously skyrocketed into such this huge thing when you added Cody into the mix, and they're able to do All In, and then like AEW just wouldn't have happened without this. And it's so much of their fingerprints are all over it, and like it's undeniable to me. It's like, look at how much AEW has changed the industry, both for the benefit of wrestlers and staff working within the industry to give them better options. Also to fans, there's negatives too. Like, I generally like the culture of like online debate is not really for me. I don't really like the way that's kind of gone. But I mean, like, things we talked about, Shawn Michaels Hall of Fame wars from 20 years ago. There's always been that kind of thing online. It's just in a different form now. So they've outside the ring, they've done a huge amount for the business, and inside the ring, you compared them to the Briscoes. I would have the Briscoes kind of portfolio of work ahead of the Young Bucks. I think just based on variety. I think the Briscoes have had more variety in their work. I think they were able to evolve over time in better ways than the Bucks have. I think the Bucks currently are a little bit stale, is my opinion. I still enjoy them, but I still think they're capable of having a match of the year candidate tomorrow if they want to, with the right opponents. And they're still great, don't get me wrong, but the Briscoes, we saw what the Briscoes did in like what the Briscoes did in 2022. Obviously very poetic in terms of start 2023, Jay's tragic passing, and 2022 being like their final year together as a team, and what they were able to achieve during that year is just remarkable. And it really, like, you could argue it was their best year in terms of peak performances with those matches with FTR. I didn't think they'd be able to have a feud that was at the level of what they did with Kevin Steen and El Generico in 2007, but there's certainly an argument that I think the FTR feud will have a bigger historical impact and legacy, because of the amount of eyeballs on it. So yeah, but I do think the Young Bucks, with how like they had so many great matches, and they were so good so young, and they really they they took what was already a kind of evolving wrestling style on the independent scene, um, and they kind of pushed the boundaries even a little bit further and put their own stamp on it. And they were able to, what they were able to do during the peak years in Reseda with PWG was exceptional. A lot of the work they did when they were really young in Dragon Gate. Nick was like 19, touring Japan regularly for Dragon Gate, and they did a lot of great stuff there. And they had a bunch of really great matches in New Japan. Particularly, I don't want their matches that they had with Kenny and Ibushi to be forgotten. Like the match they had in California on a New Japan USA show, like that was an incredible match. I think it was 2018.
Yeah.
Just that weaved in together so much stuff. Like that was really, and then they did it again in AEW with Hangman and Kenny, and like those are some special matches that are up like amongst the best I've ever seen. So yeah, they're a no-brainer slam dunk candidate for me.
I'm with Alan. Like, I put them down immediately, and I just think like they have such a strong case, and I don't think it's hyperbole to state, the Young Bucks, if they opt to go to a WWE at the end of 2018, like there very well may not have been an AEW without them, without a CM Punk on day one with AEW. And I think this is one that I think as well, when we get the breakdown, I think among current performers, I think the Young Bucks are going to do exceptionally well, Brandon. And I feel this year they should get in, but they're also one that I could throw this out to 10 people and half of them might have a totally just, they're not fans of the style or even more so what the Young Bucks represent to them, even if it's not necessarily indicative of like, I see a lot of kind of simplification of the Young Bucks that isn't really up to snuff of like what they actually produce and have done with their ring style that to me has evolved a lot more than what I think people kind of compartmentalize them as.
Yeah, I think that they're a very divisive team with people online. I think there's probably a lot of examples of other wrestlers throughout history who were looked at as not knowing how to work or not wrestling the right kind of style or not wrestling in the right way. I think as time goes on, that will shed away from how they're perceived in history. I mean, that's not really what we're voting on, but I think that as time goes by, the people who criticize Anatina Raka for doing too many flying moves are going to be kind of the same people who are criticizing the Young Bucks right now, because I think their historical significance will continue to last and leave people with long lasting memories. And I think to think about a tag team that has had a similar volume of match quality is pretty hard. Maybe the Briscoes are in that conversation, but I don't know if anybody really comes close. Now, they were never in WWE. They never had the sort of wide recognition, like say maybe a tag team like the New Day are, who have never been on this ballot. Don't know if they ever will be. So in terms of being known to the average person, maybe not so much. But in terms of starting something that they just sort of grew out of the Indies and being in New Japan. And then, by the way, helping the Bullet Club brand grow into something that was worth being licensed at Hot Topic. And we had, I think during WrestleMania weekend 2018, I've heard the story that, somebody asked, somebody at WWE, why don't we have the Bullet Club shirts, your Bullet Club shirts in our shop or something like that, and not realizing that wasn't a WWE brand. So that stuff, helping build that brand, which is a minor point, but also being instrumental in allowing AEW to exist. I think Tony Khan was going to launch a promotion regardless of what talent he was able to get, whether or not it would have all come together and would all have worked, and enough people would, enough talent and people would have trusted AEW to be what it's become without the Young Bucks there and without the early, all in players there is another question. But it's allowed, they've played a large part in being able to create a strong alternative for fans and for workers, which has really changed wrestling in a big way.
They were the hook, especially in the early days. Like if Tony did something without them, there's a few routes he could go in terms of what his hook would be, but I don't think anything would be near as strong. Like if he could persuade Punk, but we know the reservations Punk had in terms of trusting.
And what's the domino effect if the Bucks opt out?
Like, maybe Punk is still there.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, true.
If you just look at the fact, like, how does that impact Kenny's decision making, Cody's decision making, like for Jericho to jump on board? Like those are questions we can't answer, but it's like I think they were pretty key to cultivating an audience that was so desperately looking for something else in wrestling, that they were pretty much the blueprint of like representing that to that audience of something different, that this company needed to have that, as opposed to just here's a company with all this money to fund a wrestling company. And instead there was this large groundswell that they were going crisscrossing the country, cultivating for years on the independents.
It was bigger than anyone thought. Like I can't speak for you guys, but I knew they had a pretty healthy following. I felt a pretty well finger on the pulse with that, but I was staggered to see just how big it actually was, and still with things like, and obviously this isn't directly them or anything, but there things like the Wembley show, which I was at, like it's like I think we constantly underestimate how big of a fan base there is for certain kind of niche things within this niche hobby that we all love. So
well, let's move on to two more non-confrontational picks. Let's discuss Roman Reigns and CM Punk next. Let's start with Roman Reigns, because there's probably plenty to dissect with Punk. But for Roman Reigns, Brandon, have you been a past Roman Reigns voter? And if not, has that changed over time? And what has gone into your decision process as Roman has grown into this character that is the current representation of him?
This is only his, second or third time on the ballot? I have never voted for him yet. I will probably be voting for him.
Yeah,
this time.
he was only on last year. He only got 31% of the vote, and that was
Right.
was this his first time on the ballot, or did he
that was
off?
his third year. This is his third year on the ballot. So he was on the ballot last year and the year before that.
Okay, there we go. So there you go. Yeah, 31% last year. So I mean, he has a ton of ground to make up this year, and would like that. That is not a number that would be a massive gain for him to pass the 60% threshold. But I think he has an incredibly strong case this year.
Yeah, I think, as somebody who's looking at and reporting the quarter hours, it's something that we've talked about in the last couple months, is that when we've looked at the quarter hours, maybe in 2022, certainly the first half of 2022, it was hard to decipher somebody really moving the needle. But as 2022 wore on, and certainly this year, some of the biggest quarter hours have been associated with his segments. And there's been more clarity in other ways too, across quarter hours and other forms of measurement, right? WWE has regained a lot of popularity in the last 12 months at least. Raw and SmackDown are doing better for the most part than they were, say, 2 years ago. TV ratings for both are up. Live attendance for both are up. But SmackDown, which is the brand that he's on, is up more strongly than Raw in live attendance. The TV ratings are up more strongly than Raw, both in the case of SmackDown. And I don't know if you could argue that there's anybody that's anywhere near as central to the WWE's regaining in popularity over the last couple of years than him. I've been a proponent of the notion that being on Peacock has helped, which I think it has. But I think the talent has had a lot to do with that too. And I think Roman Reigns has by far played the biggest part. I think it's easy to dismiss anybody from being a draw in this era, especially in WWE, where the brand is so strong and people want to talk about, no, the brand is the draw. And WrestleMania doesn't really draw. You can't credit that much to the talent, but because the tickets are sold so far ahead of time. But I think I was looking at the years that he's main evented WrestleMania since he first main evented WrestleMania, which is 2015. So he's main evented, go 2015 to the present, and that's 9 years. And there's only 2 years where he was not in the last match on the last night of WrestleMania. Every other year, he's main eventing. He's main eventing against Lesnar in 2015, against Triple H, against The Undertaker, against Lesnar. He has 2 years in 2019 and 2020 where he doesn't main event. He's not even on the 2020 WrestleMania, of course. That's the big pandemic one with no crowd. But then he main events again in 2021, 2022, 2023. And you could say that, well, these tickets are all sold so far in advance. Can you really attribute that to any talent? And I would say it's sort of like the inductive principle. What do you, even if you don't know what any of the matches are when you buy a WrestleMania ticket, if you're sitting here in 2017 or so and you're buying a WrestleMania ticket, and the last 3 years have been involving Roman Reigns in the main event, pretty good chance you're buying a ticket to see Roman Reigns in the main event. And these 9 shows, the ones that weren't affected by the pandemic, there's like 7 out of 9, and those are almost without exception, if you exclude some of the big government shows in North Korea and Saudi Arabia, these are the biggest live gates of all time, adjusted for inflation. There are some Tokyo Dome shows adjusted for inflation that might come close, but these are the biggest shows of all time in terms of selling tickets. And I think the NXT stuff has really shown me too that, is the brand really the draw? Well, if you isolate these one talent, it does make a significant difference. And I think he hasn't been on NXT obviously, but seeing the difference that he's made in the last couple of years on SmackDown has been remarkable. There's certainly points against him. He's certainly somebody who became a major star and has become a draw out of attrition. I think in many ways, John Cena is the trial run version of Roman Reigns, in that if we just push somebody to the moon constantly and try to get him over, will he eventually become a major star? Well, in his case, he did. And he was a top star and was pushed extremely hard in a time from 2015 to 18, where popularity in WWE declined, and that is, in a sense, a point against him. But these last couple years, where I can say without doubt he's been the biggest economic difference maker in WWE, has improved his case.
How about you, Alan? Have your opinions evolved, changed, or remained similar when it comes to Roman Reigns and the transformation specific to the last 3 years?
I love 2014 Roman Reigns. I thought he was going to be the guy, but then I saw them try to push him as the guy, and I was like, yeah, no. Look, I'm going to preface this by saying the WWE product is not for me. It's not my cup of tea. I'm really happy it's catering their audience so well at the moment, and people seem to be really loving it, enjoying it, and things are going well. That's just good for the industry as a whole. Um, so there's a certain level of taste bias with me when I'm thinking about Roman Reigns, who is kind of emblematic of the WWE product and and so much of what goes into it now. Just the overproduced uh, the phrase that gets used a lot is community theater presentation in terms of the acting and stuff, which it's just it's not for me. And when it's backstage is one thing, when it seeps into matches, it's not my thing. But like I try to step back from that in terms of analyzing him as in terms of his drawing ability, and Brandon makes a lot of really great points. And I would defer to Brandon on because of the amount of research I know he puts into that area of it, as being more knowledgeable than I am on it. But a couple of devil's advocates things that I would throw out there is that we saw Reigns in this position for such a long time, and like you said, Brandon, it was attrition. And when I think about, okay, what are they doing differently? What is Roman Reigns doing differently now in 2023 that he wasn't doing in the last couple of years since he turned heel? And based on my knowledge, I'm not aware of him doing anything greatly differently, but I am aware that Sami Zayn got incredibly hot. I'm aware that Cody Rhodes came over from AEW and really lifted the momentum of the product. I'm aware that Vince McMahon was kind of portrayed amongst the WWE fan community as kind of like the boogeyman. And when he got ousted and everyone's favorite savior, Paul Levesque, got given creative control, that kind of gave fans a boost in terms of thinking it was more, you know, thinking things were better, and then giving the product more of a chance, being more excited about the product, and them being able to cater to those fans over the last year. And then the aforementioned guys kind of being put into the mix, and the Bloodline storyline, which hadn't been hugely successful up until this year, really taking a hold this year. I struggle to see that there's definitive credit for Roman Reigns for that. I think you kind of spread that around a number of factors. And the other thing with Reigns, and I'll let you guys fill me in here, is like he would I be right in saying he's like on maybe 30 to 40% of TV and pay-per-views a year, and very much less than that house shows, or is it a higher number than that?
This is definitely the least he's wrestled in a year. I'm going to look it up, but he's on
He takes
TV.
large chunks of time off, right? And good for him, by the way. But yeah, it's when I see that, I start to wonder. I see that, yes, the fan base are more enthusiastic about the product, and as a result, they're more enthusiastic about him. But I don't think he made the fans more enthusiastic about the product. I've yet to see any kind of. I'm not aware of anything he's done differently in how he portrays himself, how he wrestles, that make me think that. And then there's a sort of historical significance, and in-ring performance aspect of it as well that I want to get into. But I'll let you kind of respond on that first.
Well,
Would you say like him turning heel was a turning point in which the fans were able to boo him, which they kind of wanted to do while being part
There
of the
was like
show? For
there was like 2 hour or 2 years of him as a heel that wasn't delivering the numbers that they have this year, right? Because he turned in 2020. Am I right
yeah,
in
it was the
saying?
summer of 2020 during the pandemic. So you had like I would certainly say it's been this past year where to me he has done his most effective work. I think yes, he has been certainly aided by some really hot baby faces that I think that is more kind of intuitive of superior booking that they had just done a god awful job with handling some of their baby faces. That has not been the issue going back even the Drew McIntyre build up last year into the Cardiff show, and then following that with Sami Zayn, with Cody Rhodes, with Jey Uso. And I think with Roman, I think it's the situation of like a lot of it, you do have to look at the totality of it. Certainly acknowledge, pardon the pun, the kind of struggle to get this guy to this role. Like it took unbelievable trial after trial after trial to get him to this position. That said, the 2015 to 2018 period, it's not as though this was Kevin Nash in the middle of the 90s business for the company either. But he didn't raise that. It's not as though he was like raising the flag either. Um, and I think it comes down to like what your assessment is of the improved booking, if that's your opinion, and whether Roman has contributed to it, whether he's been a beneficiary of that, or a bit of both. That is probably the result of this. Like he has become much more comfortable in this skin, but I think it's also been a case of the booking being much superior. And maybe that's not the strongest argument of what makes a Hall of Famer when there's there's a long list, I would say, in favor and against for a candidate like that. It's for me, it's tough then to almost assign anyone in WWE right now like Hall of Fame status if
It
like
is.
you're
I have a lot of difficulty with it, and that's I think I'd have difficulty with it whether I was super into the product or as I am not a big fan of the product. I think either way I'd find it difficult to analyze someone's case. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult than a lot of other candidates on the ballot.
Well, let's talk a bit about CM Punk, who had quite the year. Last year, he had 41% of the votes. That was up from 33% the prior year. And I have voted for Punk both of those years and for many. I believe this guy is a Hall of Famer. And for me, it's sort of like once you are, in my mind, a Hall of Famer, you don't like lose that status in my mind. So I will continue to vote for him. I thought if from the influence, I think he had a great impact on WWE's assessment of their developmental system and who could be a star post Punk, post Danielson, from his, the Ring of Honor tenure up. This guy has been he has just been someone that has attracted so much attention that people are drawn to. And it was sort of at the end of it all, he does this debut in AEW selling out the United Center that to me, if there was any question, that to me just checked off yet another box. I thought had a fantastic year in front of the camera in AEW where he was able to work, I thought like a great, post 40 in-ring style that he had a lot of interesting matches and it was all overshadowed by All Out last year. And this past year, I don't think there's anything you can look at this past year as enhancing his stock. The question is, was it detrimental enough that it's going to dissuade voters? And there probably will be some that are going to, he is the Shawn Michaels candidate on this ballot of all the behind the scenes that overrides the in-ring on-screen product that he has provided. But I am very curious to hear both of your thoughts. Let's start with you, Brandon. Are you voting for CM Punk?
Yeah, I voted for him last year. I think I might have voted for him the year before that. I will vote for him again this year. He was clearly the biggest draw for AEW. He moved quarter hours. He moved TV ratings. I mean, for a stark example, look at the first rating that he did for Rampage. The biggest show, the biggest pay-per-view show for AEW ever is All Out 2021 with over 200,000 buys. I don't know if they'll ever touch that record. He drew many of their $1 million gates, I think, including their early $1 million gates. I certainly get the impression that he was a strong merchandise draw as well. After he left, or certainly after the All Out fight of 2022, he was out of the picture and their business declined. When he came back, he helped business a little bit. It was not massive, to be fair, but he's out again, and that's not helping AEW's business. Just to give an example of the positive effect he does have on business. In ring, I don't know if he's like a Hall of Fame level in ring performer alone, but I think he's good enough to somewhat contribute to his case, and he's certainly, I would say, one of the best promos of his era.
Alan, your thoughts on CM Punk?
Yeah, so I didn't vote for Punk until that first year in AEW was done, and having seen just the difference he made and how good his performance was throughout that year, it was that was the thing to push. Like, he was right up close to the line for me, based on his career up to 2014, but that was the thing that just had him just go flying past the line. And then, yeah, there's been issues in the last 2 years, but nothing that I think detracts from what he had done. And for me, just to focus on his performance, because I think that's a huge part of his candidacy for me. So the criteria sets it as in ring, and then it says in ring or excelling in one's field. I've seen people take that to mean the excelling in one's field is specifically for non-wrestlers. I take it to mean, I can see someone having that interpretation. I take it to mean that just the overall thing is excelling in terms of performance. So in ring, promos, angle execution, conveying charisma on camera, everything that goes into being a successful pro wrestler. And Punk wasn't always. He's never been the consistency and quality of Bryan Danielson in the ring. You're not gonna vote him in based on the quality of his matches alone, but going back to early days Ring of Honor, just what a natural this guy was, with a microphone in his hand, with an angle that he could sink his teeth into. Like, the thing that really, I think I kind of went in waves of kind of becoming an independent wrestling fan. It was like seeing AJ Styles and Low Key kind of was my introduction. I was like, wow, this is cool. And then it was maybe a year later, the Punk Raven feud really just grabbed me, and just how Punk was in that feud, and his promos, the straight edge promos at the time that were just dripping with intensity. And there's just a guy that was so driven by the level of his performance, wanting to do memorable things, and caring about what he put forth there. And like, that's something that I feel, and I don't want to go on a rant about like modern wrestling or anything like that, but I feel like a lot of um a lot of wrestling today, it's like our culture, it moves very fast, in terms of um people are putting things out there for the moment, and kind of not really thinking about legacy, and creating something special long term. And Punk was someone who you could tell was of that mindset back in 2003, 2004. And it's borne fruit, because look at us here in 2023, having seen a Samoa Joe versus CM Punk feud, which captured the imagination of a big audience and ended up having a match at Wembley Stadium based on this feud that they did, that I followed in 2004, with 3 matches in Dayton, Ohio, in front of a couple of hundred fans at the Montgomery Fairgrounds, and then the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago, and then the Rexplex in New Jersey. Like, maybe 2,000 fans total were at those 3 shows, and here we are 20 years later, and there's a nationally televised storyline based on, like, that's creating a legacy with your performance and your work. And yeah, it's, to me, um, he was just so good throughout his career. A lot of the stuff he did in WWE, at times when that company was having its creative struggles, and I'm sure as he got into when he did his podcast with Cole Cabana, like, various hurdles that he felt were in his way. But if you look at what he was still able to do in spite of that, like some of the stuff, the Rey Mysterio feud, the Jeff Hardy feud, the stuff he did with John Cena, their match on Raw, the pile driver match, I always think of it as, and his feud with Brock, with Heyman involved in that, was excellent. Yeah, just the guy has done so much. He can really, like, I don't think he's the type to sit back happily in 10 years and be like, what a career. I'm really, really happy with what I achieved, and have that moment of zen. I'm sure he'll be thinking about something that's making him angry that day or whatnot. But yeah, like, I'll be sitting back and thinking about like great things that CM Punk achieved during his career. And unfortunately, at the moment, if this is where it ends, it's kind of a sour ending. So hopefully it's not, and hopefully we see more good stuff from him in the future.
The seeds of the next 2 decades of this man's career were all planted on LiveJournal in the early 2000s. I mean, if you followed CM Punk's LiveJournal, you knew exactly what kind of guy this man was going to be navigating the professional wrestling industry. And someone, by his own admission, thought like he would never be in a national company. He wanted to be Stan Hansen or Brody, going over to Japan and coming back, and no one would know him. And suddenly, I'm one of the biggest stars in the biggest company in the world, but he's still this, like, he comes from like this, like, certain upbringing in the industry, that chip on his shoulder. I think it's been both his benefit and his curse. I think it has pushed him to be an unbelievable performer, one of the most captivating speakers we've had of this generation, but also someone that has gotten in his way in the worst examples. And this past year would be multiple exhibits of such. Oh my gosh, Brandon Thurston,
Be careful. Be careful on that LiveJournal, Brandon. You might pull up some things that don't fly in 2023, if my memory serves me right.
Let me vet this.
This needs the 7-second delay on
the Harley Race Ultimate Warrior story. Probably not one we want to repeat.
Well, Punk is, to me, going to be one of the most interesting candidates this year, and I think like him and Roman are two very interesting cases that I could see them both getting in. I could also see both not making it in, but both are going to have to make up a ton of ground this year in terms of picking up votes. And I would say if you didn't vote for Punk last year, I can't imagine too many people looking at, you know what, this past year, he really does cross the threshold for me. I think you either were already a Punk voter or you weren't, and you're not going to be convinced over this past year. 2 additions, and we can kind of wrap them up together, are Moxley and Rollins, which are very interesting because here's one that left the WWE system and one that stayed in the WWE system. I would say for Jon Moxley, if you're looking for pre-2019, I don't think he has a prayer of going in based off of his WWE tenure. You're looking at these 4 years in AEW, and if that is enough for you. And for Seth Rollins, I think Seth Rollins is an incredible performer. I just do not see him getting the support at this juncture. I think he needs to certainly catapult himself as more just to a higher level in WWE. Like, the in-ring is, very, you could argue he is the best performer in WWE, but I'm curious, and either of you think differently? I think Moxley's the more intriguing debate.
Yeah, in terms of how this audience of voters feels about him, if you look at the Observer Awards, which are voted on by subscribers, not the select 200 or 300 people, but he has won Wrestler of the Year, I believe, twice, right? So if you look at the winners of Wrestler of the Year, almost all of them are in the Hall of Fame. So I think he's building a case, Moxley is, towards getting in eventually. Not ready to vote for him yet, but as time goes on, he'll improve his case. Similar for Rollins, he does, he is one of those people who sort of blends into WWE. He's definitely one of the top people in WWE. But is he Hall of Fame worthy? I think he's somebody who's going to be on the ballot for a long time, and maybe he gets in eventually, but not yet.
He was on the ballot once before, wasn't he?
I think him and Moxley were both on in 2021, and I think we're under 10%. So yeah, this is their return to the ballot.
Yep. Yeah, they're on in 2021 and this year. Yeah.
I could honestly see Rollins falling off again, and if he falls off twice, I'm not sure there's an argument to put, because what's he going to do?
It's interesting. How many people have fallen off the ballot twice? I imagine that's probably a small list.
Yeah, it's not the nicest thing if he does go off a second, like, I fail to see what could have him go on a third time that he could do. I don't think his in-ring work is going to evolve to any, like it's probably just going to slow down, right? In terms of his level of performance. We've seen already a big shift in his character. I'm not sure how many more of those he has in the holster, but who knows? But yeah, it's Moxley's the more interesting candidate for me. I think I'm going to be like putting his name on and scratching it off my ballot about 20 times before I finally email it over to Dave. I'm so close to being a Moxley voter. He's right there on the edge. If like I was told his career was ending tonight, hopefully it doesn't, I would vote for him. But I feel he's still, and I'm not someone who's hard and fast about, someone's an active performer, I'm not going to vote for them. But absolutely not. I don't think that's part of the criteria. But in Moxley's case, I feel like he's still got so much that he's going to give to pro wrestling, and I still feel like his career is. I just think there's a lot more meat on the bone to come from John Moxley, and I want to see. I think the package in 5 years, in 10 years, is going to look a lot different than it is now. And so I'm just not ready to do it just yet. I think is ultimately the conclusion I'll come to. He deserves so much credit for just being like the Iron Man of AEW. Like whenever they've needed someone to step up, it's been him. Like his I never thought he would like I was always a Moxley fan in terms of how he carried himself, his promos, and I was always kind of uh, take or leave his in-ring work. Sometimes it really clicked for me, other times not so much. And the level he's got to this year in particular, like the matches with Hangman Page and some of the other stuff he's done have just been phenomenal. His two reigns with the AEW title were fantastic. Yeah, I thought his match with Hiroshi Tanahashi at the first Forbidden Door was like I just don't think that match gets enough love. It's not a match I would have ever expected to be as good as it was. Like Tanahashi at that stage of his career, and Moxley, who can be like, you know, maybe not the smoothest of workers. But I just thought that was really good and just felt like a real visceral, great match. But yeah. So I'm very close on Moxley, but probably not going to pull the trigger this year.
One thing I don't think we talked about yet is the change in the rules so that you can only vote for about a third of the candidates on any given region, which is going to lead to what? It's going to lead to, in the next couple of years, more candidates probably falling off, right? And then, and then each category will have a smaller list of candidates, and maybe then it'll be easier for more people to get in. But I think that's going to take a year or two to really come into effect.
Alan, who else stands out for you among the modern performers? I mean, I got the sense from you, you're probably voting for the Briscoes and just any others that stand out before we, I do want to touch on Japan.
Yeah, I do want. Oh, yeah, we need to set aside time for 3 hours of Shingo Takagi talk. It's coming. Hope you guys don't have plans. Yeah, the Briscoes. I just wanted to briefly say I won't go through the list, but I did I just as a thought exercise. I went and from 2002, their first year in Ring of Honor, when Mark was still a teenager, he couldn't wrestle the first few shows in Philadelphia, because of the commission. From that point onwards to the end of 2022, I ran through and just what I think is the best Briscoes match from every year. And I have all but 3 years, I have at minimum a 4.25-star Briscoes match. And that being either a tag or a singles where they're against each other. I didn't count singles matches where they're against someone else. So just that longevity and that consistency is remarkable. And the 3 years that were missed with one, they were on hiatus in 2005. They missed that whole year. 2009, there was an injury that took Mark out for half the year. And it was also a very poor matchmaking year, shall we say, the first full year after Gabe left for Ring of Honor. There was a lot of issues that year in terms of the booking, and the Briscoes certainly suffered as a result. And then 2013, where they were both doing mostly single stuff, and also Jay had his 6 month suspension that year after winning the world title. So, but outside of that, I just have all these years with like 4 3/4, 5-star, 4.5-star matches. Just, and in some of those years, like 2006 or 2007, I'm like looking at my star ratings historically. I'm like, I could take any of like 10 matches that I have as like almost match of the year level. Like, they were so good in those years. And they were able to work as convincing, menacing heels. Like, if anyone's never seen the work they did with All Night Express in 2011, as just the most dangerous, violent heels you could imagine in modern wrestling, but then also as like beloved baby faces and in other years, and they could work a kind of fast-paced style. They could work a slow style. They could work a old school Southern tag, a brawl. So many great like stip matches, like ladder matches, street fights, all these kind of things. Like, yeah. So based on work alone, I would vote the Briscoes. So Dave says in the criteria, if you're so strong in one of the categories, you're eligible for being voted in, and they take that. For a tag team, I don't think you can be as strong. 20 years of the level that they were at, you're not going to beat that. So if you're going to vote a tag team on work alone, I think you got to vote the Briscoes. And then the other name I have, someone I've voted for the last few years, is Paul Orndorff.
Who was the strongest of these candidates in this section last year, got 50%.
Yeah, I think there's like a great wrestler for his era. Really, really good in terms of everything he did. His charisma, his promos, his work in like squash matches or more competitive matches. He was always just such a credible wrestler. Could work heel or face. And then what I think a lot of people don't realize is how he went and was one of the few guys to work main events with and draw with Jerry Lawler in Memphis, Hulk Hogan in the WWF, and Ric Flair in NWA. And like, yeah, not too many guys I think can say that. Like, he went through every territory pretty much that meant something during the 80s. I just think if you're going to take an 80s wrestler, Paul Orndorff is high on the list for me, and certainly of ones that haven't been voted in thus far.
Yeah, when he died, and you put into context, like the Hogan run is just staggering that he has in the mid 80s. My correction, the strongest were the Steiners last year that had 52% of the vote. And I'm kind of curious, Brandon, like how much does something like Rick Steiner this year, do you feel that affects voters or has minimal, if any, effect when it comes to just people's comfort level of like voting for somebody that has like a damaging hit to their reputation that doesn't necessarily correlate to does it correlate to their candidacy?
It probably affects them somewhat. I would think, who are the voters here? Reporters, people who talk about wrestling like us. I wonder.
I don't think old wrestlers. I think a lot of the old wrestlers
Exactly.
share some similar views as Rick Steiner. So
they're even aware of it to begin with, and if they were aware,
yeah,
of it,
exactly.
Unfortunately, do these people care about it? I could see it lessening enthusiasm. I was surprised to see that the Steiner brothers were the leading candidates who did not get in last year.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on over to the Shingo Takagi section, represented by Japan. It's kind of interesting. Like, we talk about the Briscoes, and Brandon had just pulled up like their cage match ratings. And granted, cage match has definitely gained, I would say, influence these last couple of years. But nonetheless, it's by a gigantic margin that their votes are reflective of the 3 FTR matches, as opposed to like 20 years before that. And with Shingo Takagi, like, I'd imagine, Alan, a ton of people that are voting for Shingo Takagi are looking at these last 4 years in New Japan, and it's a case of platform of the Briscoes in ROH and Shingo Takagi in Dragon Gate that is massive parts of their careers, but just don't have the same eyes that, the Briscoes in AEW for a year / Ring of Honor or Shingo in New Japan have had these last few years.
Yeah, I think because someone posted on the Voice of Wrestling Discord yesterday, and I was looking at it, and I think they had on the cage match guide, something like 70 or so Shingo matches that were up there. And I know my good friend Case Lowe, he did a great kind of he put together something, and he's a Dragon Gate expert, more so than me even, I think, these days. And Case did something. He was super knowledgeable on Shingo's whole career right back from the start, and he tallied. And honestly, I would probably even have it a little higher if I was stuck at my own records. He tallied 205 Shingo matches that were 4-star or higher, and that was up until I think like maybe end of 2021, I want to say. And like, that's an astronomical number. And for me, yes, cage matches absolutely weighted towards what Shingo has done in New Japan. And if you're to compare him to a Kazuchika Okada, who's essentially his whole meaningful career has been in the New
Streaming
Japan
era.
boom era, streaming era, where everyone's watching these matches and going on Cage Match and rating them, there are so many Shingo matches from Dragon Gate that I would consider like high-end match of the year level bouts that probably very few people have rated on Cage Match, and a few people outside of a small bubble would have seen. And certainly in terms of Hall of Fame voters, I don't think it's well known. So like, that's like, I've written articles about Shingo over the years to try to make that argument so it is a little bit more well known. And it's basically, for me, and there is a argument for Shingo in terms of certain things he's been, not necessarily that he has been a Hall of Fame level draw. He certainly hasn't, but there's positives in that criteria for him that are a nice little icing on the cake. But when you're voting for Shingo, and I lump Tomohiro Ishii into this as well, what you're asking yourself is, how good do you have to be in terms of performance, in terms of portfolio of great matches, to get in on Work Alone? And what is your, as a voter, um, what is your benchmark for that? For me, I keep a every 4 years I do the greatest wrestler ever list, and to me, I would have to have you in the top 30. I would say, in or around greatest wrestlers ever. I would have to consider you at that level to and that's purely talking in terms of performance, to vote you in on Work Alone. If you're amongst that top 30, you get in on Work Alone. And there, as we see the wrestling move towards wrestlers having much more of a care for their match quality now than, say, in like 1991 or 1987, or certainly even the late 90s. Like, it's match quality, chasing star ratings has become a much bigger thing. So you're going to see a lot of guys with deeper portfolios than you had in the past. But if we're going to vote in everyone that has 104.25-star matches or whatever, just for argument's sake, you're going to end up finding yourself probably more and more thinking about voting in guys who really, I don't know if Masato Tanaka or Roderick Strong are guys who are Hall of Fame candidates, even though they have this litany of great matches. So what I think about is, okay, I see this person now as being kind of amongst the greatest ever in terms of in-ring output, but in 20 years, are they still going to hold that spot in my top 30? I'm very confident Shingo Takagi and Tomohiro Ishii will. I don't think there's going to be, in my lifetime, I don't think 30 guys are going to put together better portfolios of in-ring work than those two. Right now, as people know, I'll say it bluntly and clearly, Shingo Takagi to me is the greatest wrestler of all time. I had him at number 1 in my last list in 2021. And that's from following his career as a rookie in 2004 and seeing everything he's done. And I think he is, in terms of pro wrestling performance, and it comes from the amount he thinks about the business, what a huge fan he is of the business, his historical knowledge, how driven he is. This is a guy who lives in a small apartment with no family, who lives, eats, and bleeds pro wrestling. Like the only thing, he did a tour of his apartment recently. Like it's completely bare bones aside from he has a Tozawa figure. That's it. It's like he's got a Tozawa figure, and then it's like this is where I go when I'm not doing training or actually at shows wrestling. And if you look at since he came into New Japan, he's been the Iron Man. He's been the guy who has been on every tour, whether it's Fantastica Mania, whether it's going overseas, whether it's just your bog standard destruction tour. He's the guy during the pandemic they put the company on his back for large swathes of time. Hiroshi Tanahashi and him had a mini feud for about 2 months during that era. And Tanahashi did a promo backstage that really stuck with me, where he said, and this is Hiroshi Tanahashi, we're talking about, he said, Shingo Takagi is the leader of the pack. We're all chasing him. And that really resonated with me. And it just validated what I always thought about Shingo in his Dragon Gate run. So, yeah. And Ishii, in terms of work alone, is a little bit back from that, but not far off. And I'm someone who actually as great as Ishii's New Japan stuff has been since like 2012, 2013, there's actually, if you dig into the old archives of random Japanese indies from the 2000s, there's a lot of great Ishii stuff. This is like a guy who was having some awesome matches in War and Michinoku Pro in like 2002. He had a match at Mochizuki in War in 2000, which I love. Mochizuki, there's a guy that should be on the ballot at some point. But anyway, I've said enough. Sorry, I'm wrong. I could talk for hours about these guys.
The headline is Shingo Takagi, greatest wrestler of all time. I voted for Shingo last year, as I did Ishii. And I feel that, like, with Ishii, I think you hit the nail on the head, Alan, is if you are going to go on the criteria being so great in one section, how great does one have to be? Because when I went through this yesterday, if you go by cage match, 140 of his matches, 8.0 or higher, 10 5-star or above matches from Dave Meltzer. Couple the fact that this dude is doing this now at the age of 47 and has been wrestling since 1996. He debuted when I was 12. Okay. I am nearing 40 with 2 children. So, I mean, that's longevity in a nutshell right there. I would also argue that he has been consistently Mr. G1, with all due respect to Masahiro Chono. He is Mr. G1 at a time when the G1 has never been more popular. He is the constant on a tournament that is based on the highest level of wrestling in a small period of time over the year. He is the consistent highest performing wrestler every single summer in that tournament or fall. And I think has greatly enhanced just the prestige of the G1 as it has been exported worldwide for people to sign up for New Japan World. So like Ishii and Takagi get my votes because I think that I think for Takagi, like, I think it's just a clear blind spot for a lot of people that Dragon Gate does represent. That is I think very, very like under covered promotion when it comes to their stability at a time when Japan was very, very unstable.
And Shingo as well, during sort of time between Dragon Gate and New Japan, he had a couple of months where it was like, oh yeah, maybe I'll just, take it easy for a bit, rest up before I just make this big career move. No, he worked a Champion Carnival, he worked Battle of Los Angeles, and he was like incredible in both of those. Like the guy is just, he's so motivated, he's so driven and so durable. Like he's knock on wood, he like never misses any time due to injuries or anything like that. It's quite amazing.
Yeah. So Ishii is probably the one candidate that I'm going to vote for. I could be talked into Jackie Sato and Beauty Pair.
I wanted to talk about them because this is an interesting one because Jackie Sato is in. She was in the inaugural class in '96, but she's on this year to join Kawada as a 2-time member as part of the Beauty Pair, which were like a phenomenally influential like pop culture act in Japan that went above and beyond just a professional wrestling tag team. And I guess it comes down to like, I'm kind of torn on some of these like tag team additions because for many of them, like you take a Heart Foundation that are on the ballot, Like Bret Hart is in the Hall of Fame. I don't think most people are arguing Bret Hart's candidacy. I would take into account Bret Hart's involvement in the Hart Foundation with his candidacy. Is Jim Neidhart a Hall of Famer? And this is going to be your argument is if you see such a difference between the two, are you voting them in as the act on its own? Maybe. But I think it is going to be a case by case basis that you go with. Like I voted for Rock and Perez because I think that their time together, like, yes, Rock is already a Hall of Famer, but I think that team, if you study late 50s, early 60s in New York of what they drew, like it was phenomenal numbers that they were doing with the Graham brothers. And like that was a tag team territory during their biggest run on top. But there's other tag.
Did you vote Holy Demon Army, John?
I did. They got in
same.
as well. So yeah, I'm going to be voting for the beauty pair. That's my long-winded answer to that one, because I mean, just in studying them, I think it was a short period. That's the argument against it. And the fact that Sato is in, that you would see as like the stronger of the two. But man, for the period that they had, this was also like they were also handicapped by the age limit as well. Like they were not going to have a 15-year run together. Like that was just not going to happen in All Japan Women. And then Jackie Sato comes back out of retirement in her 20s and has like a second run on top of it. But yeah, the beauty pair. Any others that you're voting for in this section, Brandon?
Just Tomohiro Ishii. I need to learn more about the beauty pair, but SEMA is close, and I have a soft spot for Hayabusa, but I will not be voting for him.
You're of the 90s tape trading generation, yes. Brandon. It's that community has all got a soft spot.
The first tape Hayabusa I ever got through the mail was the best of Hayabusa.
I love it.
It changed my wrestling life. It's like a 6-hour, 6th generation, terrible quality tape. It ends cut off just as we're getting to the All Japan era, where it's Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki versus Jun Akiyama and Mitsuharu Misawa from Real World Tag League, I think 96. And I'm like a 15-year-old kid just flipping out watching this match, and it just cuts off. And I was introduced to All Japan Pro Wrestling that way in the All Japan in the 90s. But Hayabusa was super cool because he would do the high flying stuff. He would do dangerous stuff, and he would do the death matches too.
And
so that
the look, an iconic look, one of the coolest looking wrestlers of all time.
Yeah, sure. Shima's gotten my vote every year, but he's also one where I don't feel he's going to go in. But I feel
if there was no limit this year of 3, because we're limited to 3.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
It would have been a disaster if the guys didn't get in last year, or did get in last year, were still on the ballot, and we were trying to limit to 3. Oh my god! But it's actually made it quite easy for me because Ishii, Shima, and Shingo are my 3 guys, and I would have voted for them comfortably. So yes, like someone like the beauty pair, like Brandon said, I'd like to give more time and thought to, but I'm going to use my vote on the 3 that until those 3 aren't all on the ballot, or unless we go to 4 at some point, I'll just keep voting those 3. Shima, I won't spend a ton of time on Shima. Like he's obviously a great worker, but there's huge levels of influence there, not just on Japanese wrestling, in terms of what he was able to do with Toryumon and Dragon Gate,
who he brought over
of those companies. It's like his influence on US wrestling, like that March 31, 2006 Supercard of Honor Trios match, like that shaped independent pro wrestling. I talked about the Young Bucks kind of putting their spin on things. That came a little bit later, but like the style of indie wrestling, the Ricochets, the Johnny Garganos, the people like that style that those guys mastered, El Generico, it came from Dragon Gate, and a lot of them learned it in Dragon Gate because that's where they went. And like, if you talk to a Ricochet, like he was, he would just talk about how he was trash before Shima took him under his wing and brought him over to Dragon Gate and taught him how to be a star. And the thing you get in Dragon Gate, and it's probably not great for I know some of the Western wrestlers have talked about what a shock to the system it is in terms of kind of building up injuries and stuff. Is they work so much. I think a lot of the Japanese guys in Dragon Gate, like you look at Susumu, just a really cool side fact on the recent Dragon Gate Korakuen show, they celebrated the 20th anniversary, or sorry, 25th anniversary of Susumu, Genki Horiguchi, and Yasushi Kanda and Kenichiro Arai. They celebrated their anniversary by having the same 2 singles matches they had on the first Toryumon show in 1999. They were able to do those same matches on a Korakuen show in 2023 with all 4 guys still active, which is remarkable. So like a lot of the older Toryumon guys and Dragon Gate guys, like they've been able to stay very durable and injury free. But I think a lot of like your Western wrestlers that went over, and it was a shock to the system just working as much as they did. But the thing was, you get so good with those reps. You get so good, and Dragon Gate has such an emphasis on portraying yourself as a star, connecting to the audience. That I think helped a lot of US indie guys as well. The list is long in terms of people: Matt Seidel, Jack Evans, Generico, Uha Nation, Rich Swan, Ricochet, countless others that spent. Oh, Pac, obviously. So many that excelled as a result of being there. And Shima was in many ways responsible. And he's left Dragon Gate in 2018, and it's been an interesting journey since then. That's probably a topic for another time. But it's he'll get my vote based on his influence for sure.
That'll be a long form podcast from Alan entitled "An Interesting Journey." ...
Yeah, for sure.
The last section we can go over is the non-wrestlers, which is a maximum of 6 that you can vote in. And the candidates are Dave Brown, Bobby Bruns, Bob Caudle, Bobby Davis, Joe Higuchi, Jim Johnston, Larry Matizik, James Melby, Rossi Ogawa, Reggie Parks, Morris Siegel, Tony Schiavone, George Scott, Senshiro Takagi, Mike Tenay, Ted Turner, Roy Welch, Stanley Weston, and the Grand Wizard. So who will you be voting for, Brandon, among the non-wrestlers? I have not finalized my list here, but I do have 4 for sure that I'm voting for.
It's the same as last year. So the belt maker, Reggie Parks, best in his class. Jim Johnson, the music producer, best in his class. And I will vote again for the Grand Wizard, who, of course, was a legendary manager in the WWF.
Have you heard that Dave is considering adding Zane Breslov to the ballot next year, as well as, and this is going to be the most interesting, Jerry McDivitt to the ballot?
Wow.
How strongly was, as I've heard, like people reacting to that, and then I've heard people say it was just an offhand kind of.
I heard the clip. He sounded like he was very serious about it. I mean,
God, yeah, no, that's like, where do you draw the line? Like, come on.
Jerry McDivitt.
They had someone who was a damn fine head of HR for 20 years, and it's like, or like, oh, the person that provided the catering in 1998 was just exceptional, and we need, like, at some point you have to draw a line of what's outside the realm of the Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I think the Great Lawyer is very much outside that. I would even struggle with Nick Khan, and I think there's argument in terms of how influential he's been, but I don't know. He's an executive with it's, to me, that's you're going too far.
How do you feel about Ted Turner, who is on this ballot?
I don't. I would like there to be more record of Ted Turner clearly having thought about pro wrestling and made decisions for the pro wrestling company than there is. Dave has a line where he says Ted Turner thought about wrestling 5 minutes a year. I don't know if that's the case, but I've not seen anything to make me think it's not the case. So it's he's just that little bit removed. He had a big impact in terms of at least one decision he made, but I don't know. I just don't think that should be celebrated on something like this, where,
I think it's hard for, like, I haven't voted for Ted Turner in the past. He's one of those where you say it to them and your immediate reaction is, well, like, of course Ted Turner should be in. But as I give it more thought, like, like, where do we draw the line? Like, where is WWE once they leave Spike, if not for a Bonnie Hammer at USA Network? I mean, it could have like drastically affected that company who had no leverage leaving Spike. Granted, Ted Turner, it was, significant decision making that he made, but I don't know. He's one for me that just has not crossed the line where it's certainly a different industry with him, but it also was not his bread and butter either, in terms of his day to day.
Yeah, in terms of his function, like he's not somebody who worked full time primarily in the wrestling business, and that's the case. I think with everybody else who's in this Hall of Fame. Yeah, it's
he was out racing. He was out racing yachts with Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah. God knows what else. Yeah. Will Mr. Zaslav get onto the ballot, Brandon?
It's a good question. And
does he think about wrestling more than 5? I guess he's thought about wrestling more than 5 minutes this year.
Probably, but at least when he was talking to Tony Khan. But I think, like, looking at Ted Turner, it's like if he was not the figure in culture and wider culture that he was, he's probably not rising to the radar enough for people to request him to be on the ballot and get the votes that he's got. And I feel like there's, not to downplay what Ted Turner has done for the wrestling business, and that he gave wrestling a TV outlet, which was extremely valuable, and he had the power to do so, and he did it. But there's probably a lot of other people whose names we just don't recognize as well, who made, I don't want to say similar contributions because they didn't have as much power, but made important contributions, but we just don't know their names. But everybody knows Ted Turner's name because he was such an important figure in media in general in the 80s and 90s.
I suppose the question I'd ultimately ask when it comes to someone like that is, did this person contribute to the product? And I like a commentator.
You saw those Billionaire Ted skits.
A booker who doesn't appear on screen. No, they're not an on-screen part of the product, but they're influencing the product and contributing to it actively. And an executive like a Nick Khan. Nick Khan is the first to tell you he's completely hands-off with the product. So if he's saying that, then I'm saying, okay, that's great. You're not going to be in the Hall of Fame.
I'll get a little dark here, but I mean, there is going to come a time when Ted Turner is going to die, and there is going to be massive media coverage when he does pass away. And if he's at 41%, like that certainly could be enough that it puts him over the threshold if there is, significant spotlight on, his career, his legacies. Like there's always going to be usually that bump when someone passes away, and naturally you're going to get that further spotlight, and it might be enough that it makes up because he's come within striking distance at 41% to get in.
Do you think pro wrestling will get a mention in any mainstream article about him after that happens?
It's hard to say. It might be small. It's not going to be in any of the first 10 paragraphs of the Ted Turner legacy, most likely. Well, I'm voting for Dave Brown for sure. I mean, the guy out there stumping on Collision.
His performance on Rampage last
he's
week,
never watched
over the edge for
AEW.
me.
But Dave Brown, God bless the man.
He's still so sharp. Like he was right there with those guys. Like, yeah.
If he does a game changer show by the end of the year, I mean, that's going to seal it. I'm voting for Bobby Bruns. Bobby Davis, I've, since, researching him after reading like the Buddy Rogers book, I mean, he's just a very overlooked figure. And Jesse Collins has a really great piece on Bobby Davis. If you want to check that out on the Voices of Wrestling site. And Morris Siegel. Those are the 4 I'm on right now. I guess I have more options here, but Alan, who stands out with you on the list?
I've got Bobby Davis, Dave Brown, Joe Higuchi, Larry Matisic, Tony Schiavone. Morris Siegel is someone that I feel like could be pressured into voting for because the people who are like, I don't know, I know very little about Morris Siegel. There's very little out there to know about him, but it seems like people are like he needs to be in this thing, and it's something that I think a lot of people feel like he should be a what does Dave call the candidates who get kind of put in without a vote. He should be one of those because he comes so far before everyone else. It's like how can you judge them? And because he's down as historical, and so is like Sergeant Slaughter or the Hart Foundation. It's like
he does kind of fall into that category we had last year with Lou Darrow and Johnny Doyle. Like we're so far removed,
from that period.
But
I I have 5 for sure, and maybe I'll be bullied into voting for Mars Siegel by Jesse.
Well, there you have it. Are there any outstanding candidates among the historical performers that have your eye, Alan? Before we
Yeah,
we
so
wind things down.
I've got 5. The max is 8 in this. I won't use my full 8. I've got Sputnik Monroe. I've got Rocca and Perez for the reasons you mentioned earlier. I've got Johnny Rougeau, who's someone
Me too.
I think really highly of. I'm not gonna do the pitch on Johnny Rougeau. I don't feel qualified to do it when the work of Pat Laprade is out there. I'd say just find anything Pat Laprade has ever written about Montreal wrestling and Johnny Rougeau, or anything he's ever done talking about it. It's when you learn about it, you're like, why is this
He's
guy?
such a strong candidate when you really
He-
do go into like the research that
It's
Pat's done and such.
crazy,
Yeah.
and Montreal is like one of the just definitive pro wrestling cities. Like, to me, it's like it's got such a legacy in pro wrestling. Like,
And he traveled. It was also not just Montreal centric. Like that's where he's
yeah,
attached to, of course. But the guy did leave his territory too, and did well on top of it. I mean, there's the language barrier, I think, when it comes to his history and such. But yeah, when you go into like, man, the numbers this guy drew and where he drew, it's, I don't know. I think he's one of the stronger candidates, and you know that support has grown.
JYD also for me. I don't feel like Hall of Fame cases are built on these kind of like little stories or things, but sometimes I feel they're nice to share. It was when I was in New Orleans, the first of the 2 WrestleManias I went to in New Orleans. We were in a restaurant, and the waitress or someone working there picked up on our accents being from abroad, and she was very inquisitive why we were visiting and what we were looking to see and all this. And it's like, oh, we're going to the WrestleMania show. And she had no idea WrestleMania was happening. She didn't know anything about wrestling, and then she was just fascinated that we had traveled for that purpose. And then she goes, "Is JYD going to be there?" I had to
Oh, wow.
say, had to break it to her that he was unlikely to be there. So it was like, yeah, it's just a nice little thing, but it is representative of just what a huge cultural icon he was in the early 80s in Louisiana. And the thing that I learned last year, which I didn't realize previously, was how big of a draw and a star he was in Houston. And for people that don't know, the Houston territory, Paul Bosch's Houston territory, it was basically, rather than being a territory like a Mid-South or a Memphis where you had your stars of your territory, he had relationships with all these other territories and would bring in guys to supplement their work. So it might be a couple of guys from Texas, a couple of guys from St. Louis, wherever it would be. Like, he would bring them into Houston. It was kind of like an all-star kind of a situation. And JYD was someone who was used a lot there. He wrestled Nick Bockwinkel on multiple occasions for the AWA World Heavyweight title there. It drew really well. Like, JYD was a big draw, big cultural phenomenon. Yeah, there's negatives to his case for sure. The WWF run, in terms of his in-ring performance, is a bit of a struggle, but and then Sergeant Slaughter, absolute no-brainer candidate for me. I think one of the best performers of the 80s in terms of match quality, in terms of his character, just his work in the early 80s in the Carolinas, and then in New York for WWF. Like, the stuff he did with Iron Sheik is some of my favorite wrestling ever. Like, those matches, the boot camp match obviously is the one that's talked about, but the matches and angles leading up to that at the MSGs, I think for like 3 straight months beforehand, unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, and this guy got 59% 2 years ago, as close as you can come. Then fell to 57% last year. And is this not the year? Yeah, he's got to get 50%. Fallen candidates will be dropped next year unless they are elected in or garner 50% of the vote. So yeah, if Slaughter falls below 50, he would be off this year. I
And
think
he's moved from modern to historical
right.
this year. So it's
That's
going to
right.
be interesting to see if that changes his number a lot.
the last one that I have for you, Alan, is where you fall, and this could be a whole separate podcast, but just a yes or no answer. Big Daddy, thumbs up, thumbs down.
Uh,
The
thumbs
real
down.
Shawn Michaels of this ballot.
Sorry, Alan Blackstock. Brandon was fascinated about the idea of that I was going to the library last
Oh,
week
yeah.
for Hall of Fame purposes. It was to print out Case Lowe's Roman Reigns article because I don't have a
Oh.
printer. And but I decided Brandon was so excited about it. I was like, all right, all my Hall of Fame research is happening in the library. And I went there and spent a couple of hours there, read a bunch of stuff, wrote out my ballot on the back. But one of the things I did is I was curious, will I be able to find anything in the library that's in any way connected to anyone on this ballot? And a small library in Dublin is like, will I be able to find something? And I found like a encyclopedia kind of a thing. It was like a British and Irish history encyclopedia. And I went to the B section and sadly, Big Daddy did not make it. There was other celebrities in there, but no Big Daddy, I'm afraid to say. So apologies once again to Alan Blackstock. If anyone has ever carried the flag for a candidate with the strength and the gusto that Alan Blackstock has for Big Daddy, I have not seen it. But sadly, he's not getting my vote.
I was always hoping we'd at least get like a think piece with the headline, "Surely he's a Hall of Famer." No. We have a super chat here from Jake Allenar, who writes in, do any of you see an issue of Chris Benoit still being in the Hall of Fame despite the obvious that happened? So a light question to round out our conversation. So for those that might not be familiar with his Hall of Fame past, Chris Benoit was voted in while he was alive. And then there was the first and I believe only like referendum on Chris Benoit, where he was voted to stay in the Hall of Fame. This was several years after the murder-suicide of 2007. So Chris Benoit remains in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. Do you look at this as like a black mark, Brandon, or is this one where you're not staying up at night wondering about Chris Benoit's candidacy?
I don't stay up at night thinking about the fact that Chris Benoit is still in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. That's not that I endorse murder or anything like that. I don't know. I wasn't a voter when that referendum was happening. I don't know how I would vote. I might vote to take him out.
I did vote at the time, and I had a much kind of hardline stance about I'm not voting on these individuals and who they are, because I just thought at the time it opens up such a Pandora's box. This is the extreme example, but where are we stopping about people that are unsavory figures, and does that disqualify them? So I did not vote him out. Today, I do look at it in a much different way, that I look at him.
Would you vote him in today if you were a fresh candidate?
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
And I wouldn't vote to keep him in at this point either. I think overall you can be as appreciative of the man's talents, and maybe that's what this Hall of Fame should only be voted upon. And you take out all of that, I can respect that opinion. But I think overall, Chris Benoit, his legacy is going to be tied to his ending and not the years and decades that preceded it. So I would not be voting for him now. But I can also see the other argument of that people like we are not voting for morals and ethics of among these figures that are in a Hall of Fame. I am voting for what the criteria is, but you can certainly state that, Chris Benoit, what was his contribution to professional wrestling? It's a negative one.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, is that like you can remove morals and everything from your vote and still say I'm not going to vote for him, because if you think of historical significance, his positives in terms of that are so outweighed by the negatives that he brought onto pro wrestling. I remember all the for people who weren't around the summer of 2007, like it really tarnished. Like if you go back and watch some of the media appearances, like pro wrestling was pulled through the ringer.
It was the worst period for just like covering this and talking about this stuff every week.
It
Like
was bad.
as low as I can recall a period of just, it was so depressing to like have to go.
Were you doing the show at Morrow at that time?
Yes.
John?
Yeah. We were doing, like, we were on the air the next day. Yeah, it just like a terrible period, just in the sense of like there was so much like you couldn't just divorce this from professional wrestling. Like you had to connect these two things. Like what was the cause of this for this individual? And people have like rationalized and come to their own conclusions, but it's one that it was a very dark period. But I mean, it was one, and WWE hardly a shining light in terms of how they handled it. And today I think that story is covered a whole lot more different in terms of how they went out there and how they presented like their side of things. It was, it was a period that I think the WWE very much wanted to just move on and get us further away from. But it's certainly a discussion that was out there for a long time. Well, on that pleasant note, as we wrap things up here, this was great. I really enjoyed doing this whole discussion. We only got to a handful of the candidates, but
can I raise one more thing?
Yes.
Are there any candidates who are not on the ballot that you think should be on the ballot?
I mentioned Nozaki Mochizuki earlier, for a lot of the same reasons as Shingo and Ishii. Although the extra thing of he's currently like in his mid-50s and he's still incredible, and his son might end up even better. People who aren't familiar will see him at the upcoming New Japan Power Struggles show. But yeah, so Mochizuki for sure.
Let me throw one of both of you, like in terms of, let's assume that by the time we're talking next year, there's a new television deal, which maybe that's being presumptuous, but probably not. A Tony Khan on this ballot. Like to me, it's one that
well, as far as the bare requirements, you have to have what 10 or 15 years of experience in the business, right?
Hey, he had a lot of years of hard.
Yeah, what's considered experience here? This guy's been, he's been at the roots.
Tape trading. Yeah.
This guy was probably deep on message boards chatting with Alan4L in the middle of the night.
He did the coding for John McAdams' tape trading website back in the early 90s. So, to me, for Tony, I'd want to see. I think his case is going to be a lot better. It's going to be a lot more interesting to evaluate his case in 20 years than it will be next year or anything like that. So very much wait and see what comes, because we've seen how things change year to year. Who knows what things will look like in terms of his like he could just decide he's done with this tomorrow, or he could create 3 more promotions. Like, would either of those things shock you? We don't know where the story is going, and I feels like we're still in the very early chapters of it. Like he's the age Vince was when, like, before the first WrestleMania, I want to say, maybe around.
Vince was like 40 and Khan's 41, I think, like around the same age.
Yeah, there's a lot of story left to be told there. I think
and this is the first time like he needs to, he's going against like resistance, and there's popularity that is decreased in the product, and how he's going to go about that, what his answers are of sort of getting AEW through the period that they're going with right now. Like he's got his he's got a tumultuous period ahead of him, I would say. Not to mention like where the television industry is in the moment that he's navigating as he has to solidify this next television, informative of what the next 5 years is going to be for that company and for the industry. Was there anyone with you, Brandon, that you brought that up? Was there anyone that like jumps out?
I'm going to sound like the representative WB Mark here. I think the Usos have got to be coming soon as candidates. They're the same age as me, I think, so that means they qualify in age, but they've been as far as a tag team, I think they've been the most important tag team, at least of these last couple of years. That's coincided with an increase in WWE's business fan interest, so I think that's coming. And then the one that gets brought up a lot is I guess Dave's not going to put himself on, which means I guess he's also not going to put Wade Keller
on. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like media,
I would vote for Wade Keller for the record. Yes. As we'll get into in plugs.
Yes. Would Chris Harrington get on the ballot, Brandon? I don't know.
He doesn't have 15 years of experience in the business yet either.
Yes. Trying to think of all of our connections here. Maybe Wade Ting gets on the ballot.
I thought of someone there. I'd like to see Grant Hamada back on. I think Yeah, there's a lot of thought to be given to his candidacy that I don't think was given to his candidacy, and a lot of the influence arguments I made for Shima earlier, I think you can go a couple of generations back and on that same kind of family tree, look at Gran Hamada. So yeah, that's one I think I'd like to see people analyze a bit more and give some thought to. But I think it would be very hard for him to get in with the cap on the Japan category right now.
Yeah. I definitely like, I think as the Hall of Fame expands and you look at sort of like a lot of the new technology that we have, like we have access to so much data now. Like I look at stuff like that, like tools that people have that have absolutely changed the way the fan experience is, the way wrestling is covered. Like you look at like the cage matches of the world or just advancements in technology, like things that are sort of our day to
Footage
day.
being found, like
Totally.
there's all Japan matches that have never been seen before, fan cams that are being put up regularly now that like that are really good quality and stuff from like the early 90s and the late 80s, and it's remarkable to see. It just gives you hope that there's stuff that you thought you might never see could still potentially be out there somewhere. It's gathering dust in someone's attic.
Yeah, this is the outsourcing David Bixenspan for his list of the unsung heroes of professional wrestling coverage that is out there. But this was a fantastic chat, and Alan, we definitely want to have you back on sometime in the future. But do let us know where all of the Pollock and Thurston viewers can go check out more of all of your fine work under potential future Hall of Fame candidate Wade Keller.
Well, guys, thank you so much for having me on. It was an absolute blast. As you both know, I'm a huge fan of both your work, and the first time getting to do a podcast with both of you, and it was great to do so. And on a perfect topic, I think we finally gave WH Park his wish, John, and did a show together, and Brandon thrown in for good measure as well. It was a splendid time. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, if people want to hear more from me, very much like podcasting at the moment for me is like it's just something I do for, I highlight the things I enjoy about pro wrestling, and a lot of that is this historical stuff, and um, I kind of go in a lot of different avenues in terms of what I have on my show. It's Alan4L's ProWres Paradise, and it's available at PW Torch VIP. I'm not trying to keep up to date with um, all the modern happenings and giving my hot takes. There's so many shows out there. I basically do what I think will be fun because I think if I'm enjoying myself doing a podcast like I have today, it's going to make for better listening for the listener. But yeah, you can check that out at PW Torch VIP. And one of the things I'm really proud of the last 2 years or so is the very hack named 34L30 that I've been doing, where to celebrate, I think like 2021 was my 30 years as being a pro wrestling fan. So I just took 30 of my favorite wrestlers and would have on 30 great guests to talk about those wrestlers. And we're, I think, about 24 episodes in at this point. So kind of spaced them out over the last 2 years or so. And it's some of my favorite stuff I've ever done. Like just yeah, I won't get into the list of wrestlers and guests we've had for that series, but I've just been really really proud of that. And yeah, sign up for the Torch VIP. Look, there's obviously, as people would expect, there's all kinds of great analysis of like modern wrestling, and it shows like reviewing current TV shows, and there's the Torch newsletter, obviously every week, which I sometimes contribute to with a column. But what everyone would know what to expect from that end of it. What I like to plug when I plug the Torch is the archives of old radio shows that Wade did in the early 90s that he, God bless him, kept on tape and has converted all these shows. The Pro Wrestling Focus shows he did every Sunday morning in like 92, 93 are just incredible listening because you get like Paul Heyman coming on and doing his spin as he was like in a legal battle with WCW after having left that company. You get Sean Waltman on like right around the period he's joining the WWF, and like he's talking openly about like where things are at in terms of the progression of joining that company and like going over to do Best of Super Juniors, and we'll see what happens when things come back. Like with him beating Razor Ramon on Raw, like you get his thoughts live as they were at that time. There's a really interesting show I listened to recently where they had Brian Christopher and Chris Candido both on as guests to hype an upcoming match they were having on an indie show. And it was really funny because Chris Candido was like total open book, like not trying to insult the listener's intelligence. And Brian Christopher was like, just complete heel worker mode, like, and you just see the difference in these two young guys in their 20s in terms of how they saw the business. And like Wade, God bless him, was like apologizing to his listeners for Brian Christopher's way. Is like he might not have been familiar with the standard we expect of our guests. And Wade just took things very seriously, and he was great. Like Wade was in his 20s at this point, and like he was really great. And it's really interesting to go back and listen to that stuff. So yeah, excuse me for the long plug, but I just really love those shows. So yeah, sign up for the Torch VIP, and there's all kinds of hidden bonus stuff like that you'll find there.
I would be frightened to listen to myself 20 years ago. So God bless Wade for putting it all out there for people to check out. So do check it out. A lot of great work on the Torch site from Alan, from Wade, Todd Martin, Rich Fan, an all-star cast over on the Pro Wrestling Torch site. And of course, you can go support patreon.com/Mark Calloway as well. Patreon.com/Wrestlenomics and postwrestlingcafe.com. Myself and Wei Ting will be back later tonight, right after Dynamite, where we will have our hot takes after AEW. And Brandon, anything you are working on?
Endeavor is announcing a formal review of strategic alternatives since he's been on the air here. But they will not be, what did they say here? I'm reading an email that Ari Emanuel sent out to staff. Endeavor will not consider the sale or disposition of its interest in TKO. So it sounds like they're shopping the Endeavor company, which owns 51% of TKO. They're not parting with TKO though. But somebody else, I guess, could control Endeavor. We'll learn more.
Always something to uncover next in the wide world of Endeavor/TKO. But do follow all of Brandon's great work. NXT numbers will be dropping momentarily from
they're out. They're out already.
Are they out? Okay. Alan, did you get to see what I believe Vic Joseph called the biggest match in the history of Ireland last night between Becky Lynch and Lyra Valkyria?
I haven't yet, actually.
Star rating.
I saw that what's it, Lyra Valkyria?
Was there not a parade today in the country for her big championship win?
She was Valkyrie when she was working over here in Ireland. And geez, I saw her wrestle on some small shows, like in some community halls and stuff like this a couple of years ago. And I remember thinking she seems pretty good. Like she has some potential, and yeah, good for her. She's done very well going over there, and clearly made a good impression on people to get that opportunity. And it's no surprise that Becky Lynch would want to take someone that I think she probably sees a lot of the same, a lot of herself within Valkyrie, and probably saw her as someone that she wanted to do this for. So and I know they had that footage from Fight Factory a couple of weeks ago where they showed when Becky came over and did the seminar with them there. So yeah, it's a cool story.
Yes, 787,000 viewers, 0.21 for night one of Halloween Havoc. So there you go. For Alan, Brandon Thurston, I am John Pollock, and we are going to bid everyone a farewell to, I think, the longest running episodic edition of Pollock and Thurston to date.
I knew I'd do it.
We have set the record, Brandon. I don't think we can top this. An hour 48 of great Hall of Fame discussion, and that's going to wrap up the show. So thanks to everyone, and we'll be back next Wednesday.